We all like to believe that we are good at something, maybe even better than most. And in some ways, maybe we are. But here's an uncomfortable truth. You are probably mistaken about how good or bad you really are. In many areas of your life, it's quite possible that you are either overestimating or underestimating yourself. And most disturbingly, the parts you are most wrong about are often the parts you are most certain about. The name of this has the weight of scientific study, but the essence is simple and devastating. The Dunning Kruger effect, a psychological phenomenon that shows how the least competent people are precisely the most confident, because they don't even have the tools to realize how much they don't know. This is what we are going to talk about an invisible enemy that hides within us, about how ignorance, when unrecognized, becomes arrogance, and how wisdom, contrary to what it seems, is dressed in silence, doubt, and humility. There is a type of villain who doesn't arrive with screams or weapons. He doesn't break into your house, he doesn't steal your money. He settles silently inside your mind. And most dangerously, he makes you believe you are the hero of the story. This villain is called ignorance, but not just any ignorance. It's not the one that says, "I don't know." It's the one that screams, "I'm sure." It's ignorance that masquerades as knowledge, that confuses confidence with competence, that sees doubt as weakness. The Dunning-Kruger effect is the perfect trap. The less you know, the more you believe you know. Because recognizing your own incompetence would require a skill you don't yet have. It's like trying to see the world blindfolded and swearing it's dark just because you can't see. Imagine a man breaking into two banks in broad daylight, without a mask, without a cap, without any disguise. He looks at the security cameras and smiles. He is certain that he will not be recognized. When the police arrest him hours later, he doesn't react with violence, he reacts with surprise. "But I used lemon juice," he says, genuinely confused. His name was MacArthur Wheeler, and he believed, with all the certainty possible, that rubbing lemon juice on his face would make him invisible to security cameras because lemon can be used as invisible ink on old letters. He concluded that his logic would also work with electronic surveillance. At the time, Wheeler was shocked by his arrest and insisted his lemon juice strategy had worked. He even performed a test with a camera before the crime, but the police believe he may have misinterpreted the results. According to the police, the test carried out by Wheeler may have been the result of damaged film, incorrect use of the camera, or even a change in the positioning of the machine at the time of the click. This true story reached the ears of David Dunning, a professor of social psychology at Cornell University. He became obsessed with a single question: how can someone be so wrong and yet so certain that they are right? Dunning teamed up with his student Justin Kruger. Together, they designed a series of experiments to test a bold hypothesis, that severe incompetence not only prevents us from getting it right, but also blinds us to our own error. And what they found was as shocking as Wheeler rubbing his hand across his face. The less a person knows, the more they believe they know. And the more they know, the more they realize how much they still don't know. They recruited participants and administered tests on humor, logic, and grammar. After each test, they asked the volunteers to evaluate their own performance and also estimate how they had performed compared to others. The result was alarming. The worst performances were accompanied by the greatest self-confidence. Not only did they make more mistakes, they believed they had done very well. The best participants, on the other hand, underestimated their answers. They thought that others had also been as right as they were. In other words, the more they knew, the more humble they became. And the less they knew, the more certain they were of their truths. It was confirmation of something that Bertrand Russell had already said decades before: the problem with humanity is that the stupid are full of certainties, while the intelligent are full of doubts. Bold ignorance is the invisible villain of our age. And perhaps the most tragic thing is this: the stronger it becomes, the more it silences the voice of doubt, the one that could save us. The MacArthur case was not just a poorly planned crime. It was a symbol of a universal human phenomenon. Because in some way, we have all had lemon juice splashed on our faces at some point in our lives, thinking we knew more than we did. Look at this chart. On the horizontal axis, how much you actually know about a subject. On the vertical axis, how much you think you know. Now, imagine what happens at the beginning of the curve. You've barely started learning, but your confidence is soaring. This peak is known as the Mount of Stupidity, the point where ignorance is so profound that it is mistaken for enlightenment. That's where WhatsApp experts, self-proclaimed barbecue geniuses, are born. People who read a headline and became epidemiologists. Watched a documentary and became economists. Confidence rises faster than knowledge, and the result is an inflated ego floating on empty ground. But then something happens. You continue studying, go beyond the superficial and begin to realize that the subject is more complex than it seemed. That's when you fall off the mountain and into the valley of despair, the moment when you begin to see the true size of what you don't know. It is painful, even humiliating, but it is also the beginning of wisdom. From this valley begins a new ascent, the ramp of enlightenment, a slower, more real journey. Your confidence is returning, but now based on true knowledge. You begin to master the subject, but never again with the arrogance of the beginning, because now you know what you don't know, and that changes everything. The Dunning Kruger effect graph is not just a didactic image, it is a mirror. It shows that the problem is not being on the mountain or in the valley, it is thinking that you have already reached the top when you are still at the base of the mountain. And worse, the louder you shout from up there, the less you hear those who are trying to warn you down here. Now let's explore where this effect hides in everyday life, in the loudest, most hollow voices we hear all the time. Have you ever noticed how in many meetings, debates, or even family dinners, the person who speaks the loudest is not always the one who has the most to say? The room fills with opinions, certainties, diagnoses. And almost always, the one who raises his voice with conviction is the one who has studied the least, reflected the least, doubted the least. This is no coincidence, it is the Dunning Kruger effect in action. A person who knows little has no way of realizing how little they know. What they lack is precisely the ability to recognize their ignorance. And since they don't see their own mistakes, they believe they are right, that they are correct, that others just don't understand. Meanwhile, the most prepared hesitate, weigh each word, know that the world is too complex for easy answers and, therefore, remain silent. In practice, this means that we are often guided by the most confident, not the most competent. We follow advice from those who shout the loudest, not those who think the best. And so, brazen ignorance dominates spaces that should be occupied by discreet wisdom. On the internet, this phenomenon is amplified. The logic of networks favors those who are certain, not those who have questions. The algorithm drives the extreme, the absolute, the simplified, not study, doubt, or care. The result, millions of voices, but few ideas, a lot of noise, little listening, and a dangerous illusion that knowing is just appearing to know. But why do true experts doubt themselves so much? Because those who are most prepared are precisely those who hesitate the most. It's time to reveal the other side of the Dunning Kruger effect, the quietest, the loneliest, and the truest. While the ignorant cling to certainty like someone holding onto a buoy on the high seas, true experts live surrounded by questions. Doubt for them is not a weakness, it is a beacon. But there is a price to pay for seeing clearly. You begin to see the size of the ocean, and the more you know, the more you understand how much there is still to learn. It's like turning on a flashlight in the dark and realizing that the darkness is much deeper than you imagined. That's why wise people doubt themselves, because they've explored enough to know that the world doesn't fit into ready-made formulas, that every certainty comes with a series of maybes. This phenomenon has a name: epistemic modesty, the humility to recognize the limits of one's own knowledge. But in today's world, this virtue is seen as hesitation, and hesitation for many is wasting space. Meanwhile, those at the top of ignorance, up there on Mount Stupidity, continue giving lectures, forming opinions, without knowing that they don't know. This is what studies call false consensus. The best underestimate their own worth because they think everyone else is on the same level. This silence is dangerous because it makes room for the noise of superficiality, for the arrogance of those who have never looked deeply. This presents us with a paradox. We've never had so much access to information and we've never been so vulnerable to misinformation. Because excess data without structure or depth only creates an illusion of knowledge. It's the era of, I read an article and became an expert, of, I watched a video and now I teach, of, I don't trust science, I trust my instinct. But there's a way out, a possible path between the arrogance of ignorance and the silence of wisdom. And it starts within us. There is a rare and transformative moment in a person's life, the one in which they realize they don't know as much as they thought. It's not easy to get there. It takes courage to look in the mirror and see the cracks in your own knowledge. This moment is the beginning of metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thoughts, to observe one's certainties with suspicion, to ask, am I seeing everything or just what I want to see? Metacognition is the natural antidote to the Dunning Kruger effect. It doesn't stop us from making mistakes, but it gives us the chance to realize our mistake, to adjust our course, to learn. And how to cultivate it? First, with active humility. Knowing that we are flawed is not enough. You need to want to learn, seek feedback, listen more than you talk. Second, with genuine curiosity. Not the one that seeks to confirm what we already believe, but the one that is enchanted by the unknown. The one that asks not to win a debate, but to understand better. Third, with exposure to difference. Surrounding yourself only with like-minded voices is both comfortable and dangerous. Respectful confrontation with other views is what expands consciousness. And finally, with a time of silence. The world cries out for quick answers, but wisdom demands a pause, demands space where doubt can breathe. The good news is that science shows that when an incompetent person begins to truly learn, they not only improve their performance, but they also begin to recognize their flaws. They stop being a victim of the Dunning Kruger effect, not because they now know everything, but because they finally understand that knowledge is a path, not a destination. And that's where true intelligence begins. The one who doesn't need a stage or applause. The one who is able to say with serenity, I don't know, but I want to know.